Buenos días, Richard Ford. Bienvenido a Barcelona. ¿Cómo está?
It's wonderful to be here. Nice to see you.
Para mí es un privilegio, un placer, un honor tener la posibilidad de conversar con un autor de su envergadura, un autor a nivel internacional, uno de los grandes autores norteamericanos y también un gran referente para mí. Y bueno, estamos aquí con motivo de la presentación de Sé mía, la quinta y probablemente última novela protagonizada por Frank Bascombe, a quien conocemos desde el año 1986, es periodista, ex periodista deportivo, es ex agente inmobiliario. Ha ido creciendo y madurando con usted a lo largo de los años, y digo que es probablemente la última novela que él protagoniza porque lo suyo tenía que ser inicialmente una trilogía que empezaba con El periodista deportivo, seguía con El Día de la Independencia y acababa inicialmente con Acción de Gracias. Pero luego llegó Francamente Frank y ahora Sé mía. Con lo cual me pregunto si esto es un signo de esa inesperada perseverancia de la vida.
No, it just has to do with my choices. That's all it has to do with. The unexpected in life is somewhere outside the frame for me. When I'm writing about Frank, I only choose to do it, and I just choose to do it because I think I can do it. Because it's important when you start writing a novel that you feel like you can finish it. And so I thought probably with this novel would be mine. I thought I would live long enough to finish it. And it was during COVID, and everybody was kind of worried about how we all felt. And I thought, well, maybe I can write one more book. And so the fact that this is probably, as you say, probably the last means to me that I don't think I could finish another one.
En cualquier caso, hay un empecinamiento en seguir adelante que es paralelo al del propio Frank Bascombe ante las adversidades de las que tiene que enfrentarse, porque él vive rodeado de desgracias que afectan básicamente a su familia y ante las cuales, en lugar de dramatizar, busca la manera de intentar ser optimista, incluso de preguntarse qué es la felicidad. De hecho, esta novela empieza así. Empieza él diciendo, últimamente me ha dado por pensar en la felicidad más que antes. Entonces, es que hay un momento para pensar en la felicidad, y ese momento, ¿cuándo llega? Es en el momento en el que nos sentimos felices, es en el momento en el que somos felices, o viene después. Y cuando pensamos en esa felicidad, cuando recordamos el tiempo en el que fuimos felices, es entonces cuando somos felices. Es decir, ¿qué es la felicidad? Porque en algún momento dado de la novela también Frank se pregunta si la felicidad no es más que la ausencia de infelicidad.
Well, I think there's no bad time to be thinking about happiness. My mother asked me when she was dying, she said, "Richard, are you happy?" And I said to my mother, yes, I am happy. And I was. I was married to the girl I loved. I was doing the one thing that I could do, which was to write books. And I was sorry she was leaving us. But I thought about happiness. And certainly, if you get old, and Frank is old, that's a good time to think about happiness. It may not come naturally to you, but novels are not natural things. Novels are pieces of artifice. So I make Frank think about happiness, whether it's appropriate to his age or not appropriate to his age, because I want to induce in the reader the conclusion that thinking about happiness is never inappropriate, and that we shouldn't presume that it's not our at our discretion to think about happiness. Why not? I mean, why wouldn't you ask yourself that? I mean, you have to be willing to face the answers. If you ask yourself that, maybe the answer would be, well, maybe not very much. But if you don't ask, you don't answer. You never know.
Usted ha recibido varios premios literarios, ha recibido el PEN Faulkner, ha recibido el Pulitzer, ha recibido el Princesa de Asturias de las Letras, y entonces dijo que en el mundo actual hay excesiva gravedad y que eso no predispone demasiado a la alegría. ¿Es posible que haya una confusión entre lo que es grave y lo que es profundo, entre la gravedad y la profundidad? Lo digo porque muchas veces las personas que tienen sentido del humor, que son alegres, son percibidas como personas frívolas. Y no sería el caso de Frank Bascombe ni tampoco de su hijo Paul, que es el protagonista de Semilla, que intentan mantener el buen humor a pesar de las circunstancias. Y esas circunstancias son que Paul, de 47 años, tiene ELA y viajan juntos al Monte Rushmore.
I always like it when someone wonders if I'm privileged. Yes, I am. I'm a novelist. I'm privileged to be the steward of the language. I'm privileged to write the books I want to write. Other people are privileged not to read them. They're privileged to argue with them and say that what I write is not true. But me, it's a privilege that I relish. So, for starters, yes, that's certainly true. Do we confuse gravity with death? Well, we might. Death is certainly a grave event in most people's lives, but I myself don't confuse gravity with death. Death is its own, for me, rather interesting subject. Many other things can be grave. But whether or not levity or whether or not the comic, whether or not laughing or joy or whatever you want to say is possibly a privileged response to experience, it is nonetheless a cherishable response to experience. So when I write about Frank and Paul at a grave moment in their life, I want to try to write about it in such a way that makes it tolerable and maybe even makes it in its own way joyous. I mean, when we read Shakespeare and we read about King Lear, there is something about reading King Lear, irrespective of what's happening on the stage, that elevates us, that makes us feel, if not joy, we feel exhilaration. And so for me, to write about these dark things, Sartre said, to write about the darkest possible thing is an act of optimism because it proves that these things can be thought about. So I go at these tasks very hopefully, thinking that my instinct that nothing's serious, then nothing's funny, or if nothing's funny, nothing's serious, very seriously.
Mm-hmm. La situación actual, tanto en Estados Unidos como en Europa, como en todo el mundo, ahora mismo, se percibe como con cierta inquietud ante un eventual apocalipsis o ante un colapso inminente que vamos afrontando día a día. Un poco seguimos adelante. Y un poco en el viaje que emprenden Frank y Paul hay algo de eso, añadido a cierta resignación. Ambos saben que están yendo hacia la muerte, que probablemente Paul muera antes que su padre. No es la primera vez que Frank se enfrenta a la muerte de un hijo. Tienen miedo, están asustados, pero intentan entretener ese miedo, intentan no fijarse en ese miedo, sino en otras cosas que le rodean, ¿no? Huyen del dramatismo, del melodrama, pero además intentan no caer en la autoayuda, en esa facilidad con la que muchas veces utilizamos la palabra felicidad como fórmula mágica para poder vivir alegremente los momentos más complicados de la vida.
Well, I don't know what else you do. I remember, again, when my mother was dying, I was constantly trying to amuse her. Mm-hmm. I was constantly trying to say something to her that would make her laugh, that would get a rise out of her, that would alter the course of her thoughts to her own demise. So I think it's just a natural human impulse. I think, and I know we're between two languages, maybe among three languages, but I think that Paul and Frank are not resigned. They are accepting, that they are willing to say yes, both to death and, well, more importantly, to the life that is still theirs between them. And that when someone is dying or someone is ill, or just like me, when someone is old, you can think, well, it's kind of over for you, isn't it? But there's a lot of life left. There's a lot of life left in this book. This book is all about life. Mm-hmm. And it's, unfortunately, we all know, whether you're young, you don't quite know it as well as I do.
No.
It's coming.
I am 47.
But we have now.
Yeah.
And so now is now. And so live now, because you may walk out and get hit by a bus. Mm-hmm. I mean, Frank says in the book, he says, maybe I'll get hit by a truck full of golf carts. Well, people do get hit by trucks full of golf carts. So the best thing to do is to accept what there is in life and try on the days that you have to live it all.
Mm-hmm. También está el tema de la melancolía, que los 3 primeros libros de Frank Bascombe transcurren en el siglo XX. Creo que el primero es en el 86, me parece que el segundo es en el 91 y el tercero es en el año 2000. Es una época analógica que ya nunca va a volver. Entonces, cuando miras hacia atrás, es difícil no hacerlo, no digo ya con nostalgia, sino con melancolía. Y me pregunto muchas veces si la melancolía no es la fórmula aplicable a felicidad más distancia, en este caso, distancia temporal.
Emerson says that to contemplate the human experience is always done with a little bit of melancholy. So it's just natural when you're thinking about the arc of life, that there would be within the humor that might also obtain there a little bit of melancholy. I mean, there's something about the biblical notion that we have 80 and 20 for however many years that we have, 80 and 10. There's something a little bit melancholy about that, because you kind of want to say, oh, really? Can I have a little more? Wouldn't it be a little bit better if I could live a little bit longer? But that's what we get. And so I don't know if it's a matter of it being an analog world. I think it was just an earlier world when we were younger, when we didn't think so much about eschatological things. So to write books that have a little melancholy in them, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me happy, but it doesn't bother me, because it just seems to be inevitable about contemplating existence of human beings.
Una vez más, usted hace un retrato magistral de los Estados Unidos. En un momento dado, escribe que se dirigen al más conceptual de sus monumentos nacionales y, por lo tanto, el más estadounidense. Pero se van deteniendo en no lugares sin tiempo. O dicho de otro modo, en lugares de paso. Por ejemplo, estaciones de servicio en la autopista, un punto de venta de coches, hay también un salón de masaje. La pregunta es esa, si hay cada vez menos sitios en los que permanecer y a los que pertenecer, en los que decirse, soy de aquí. Lo digo porque en cada uno de estos lugares, Frank se pregunta cómo sería vivir allí. Y de hecho hay un momento en el que pasan por un cementerio y se pregunta cómo sería ser enterrado allí. Entonces, bueno, si eres de un lugar, o si sientes que eres de un lugar, que perteneces a un lugar, ¿el lugar te pertenece? ¿El lugar es tuyo? ¿Es tu lugar? ¿Puedes pedirle a un lugar que sea tuyo? ¿Puedes pedirle a una persona, sé mía?
Well, I'll cut to the chase there, because I don't know the answer to any of those other questions. Yes, you can ask someone to be yours. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I don't mean by that to possess someone, mm-hmm. or to rob them of their discretion, or to take away their power. I mean, can you say to someone, will you be my son? Can a son say to a father, will you be my father? And so, yes, you can ask that. And yes, you should ask that of the people who you love. Mm-hmm. Not to possess them. And I know that's I know in the common parlance of political correctness, if you ask someone to be mine, the first thing you think of is, I'm arrogating all of your power. I'm not asking that. I'm just asking you to admit that I am your father. I'm asking you to admit that I am your son. That's all. It's a gesture of love between two people who have been, if not alienated, separated by the years between them, separated by experience, separated by their own notions of what their life should be about. When you get to the end of it, would you say, as we are departing, you are my father, you are my son?
¿Y los lugares?
As I said, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll tell you what I think. I grew up in a terrible place in Mississippi, which is racist and bigoted and limiting and casuitical and unfriendly to me. And what it wanted to say to me, that place, and by which I mean the people who were there, you are part of us. And what I wanted to say was, I am not part of you. I'm running my own life. I'm not going to let you tell me what I am and what I'm not. So that's as much identifying as I can with that question. You can assign yourself a place and possess that place as much as you want to. A place cannot keep you. A place cannot identify you unless you agree to be identified by it. And I mostly do not agree. I mean, I've lived all over the United States. I've lived in California, I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in Maine, I've lived in St. Louis, I've lived in New Orleans, I've lived in Mississippi, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Maine, I've lived in Vermont. In all of those places, I was completely content to be an outsider. I was completely content to say, I am not of you. I choose you. I choose to live here. I choose to be an outsider living in here. And that was, for me, the most comfortable place to be. Because when I was young, I remember the people in the place where I grew up in Mississippi trying to say, you are one of us, let us surround you. And everything that they wanted to surround me with, I rejected.
Volviendo al tema del retrato que usted hace de los Estados Unidos, siempre lo hace desde las familias. Siempre lo hace a partir de la relación que hay entre padres e hijos, entre hermanos, entre exparejas, a menudo. ¿Usted cree que quien es capaz de entender a su propia familia es capaz de entender el mundo?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think the family, and it's partly because of my own experience of the family. The family is the little moral laboratory from which we depart when we go out for the rest of the world. So the family, for me, is the most important unit of civilization. If we understand our family, is it easier to go out and... It's funny, I don't think about understanding people that much. I think understanding people is actually overrated because people are always separate from you. Mm-hmm. There is always a huge part of another person who you will never know, and that's okay. I mean, I've been married to my wife for 60 years. There's not a moment that she walks into a room when I don't think to myself, I wonder what she's thinking. I wonder what her experience is in life. I don't know. I mean, I can presume, and sometimes I'm right, but I actually don't know. And I'm frankly quite comfortable feeling that here is someone I know better than anyone in the world, I think, and there's parts of her I'll never know, that I'll never reach, that I'll never touch. So, as I say, maybe that's why it's easier for me to make people up. Maybe it's because for me to understand someone is not for me to enter and plumb their interior. For me to understand someone means that I can put the parts together in a way that fit, both about other people and also about characters that I invent. And if I can put the parts of someone together in a way that I make fit, then that's enough understanding for me. Thank you very much.
Pero además usted ha escrito sobre sus padres, habló del libro Entre ellos, también ha escrito sobre su madre en el libro Mi madre, y entonces los ha conocido como individuos independientemente a usted. Quiero decir que muchas veces cuando pensamos en nuestros padres o nuestros abuelos, lo hacemos desde el yo, en la relación que tienen con nosotros. Pero al escribir sobre ellos, al hacer sus biografías, los conocemos más allá del yo. Los conocemos antes de que nosotros llegáramos, ¿no?
It's important for me to say that characters are, for me, people I make up. They are made up of language, and they are pieces of artifice. And I know when I deliver my parents to the page that it may seem to be similar to delivering pieces of artifice to the page. But for me, my memoir about my parents was a piece of fiction. A piece of nonfiction, The memoir of my parents is a piece of nonfiction, and my allegiances in a piece of nonfiction are always to fact. I mean, I cannot ascribe to my mother, for instance, certain kinds of attitudes or beliefs or behavior that I didn't observe. Whereas in a piece of fiction, I can make up attitudes and behaviors and beliefs that these people don't have because they're not people. They are made up. So I never think of my parents as characters. I think of my parents as my parents. And what I was trying to do in writing this book was to, with the agency of language being my one strength and memory, that I was going to try to use words to reveal my parents as accurately as I could, and with no discretion or with minimal discretion about what I thought about them or what I guessed about them or what took place off stage. I would only, if I was going to say about my parents something that took place off stage, in other words, when I wasn't there, before I was born, I would always say, I would always use the conditional. I would always say, it is possible that they did this. It is possible that they did that. But always in the parenthesis of, I'm not certain. Whereas with fiction characters, I am the authority. In nonfiction, fact is the authority. So they're two very different kinds, for me, different kinds of gestures. And so it causes me not to think of my parents as characters, but only as my parents. They never achieved or departed from who they were.
Estamos habituados a autores que escriben sobre sus padres, pero quizá no tanto autores que escriban sobre sus hijos. Entonces, me pregunto si la única manera con la que podemos escribir sobre hijos es a través siempre de la ficción.
No. You write about your son. I mean, why not? So I know you said before that maybe we're trying to protect our children.
Maybe.
Well, then you shouldn't be a writer then, should you? I mean, what I'm trying to do is put something on the page for the benefit of the reader. And, you know, I always say to people, if you don't want me to write about this, don't tell me. And that goes, and of course I don't have any children. But I would not think, just as a working postulate, that people wouldn't write about their children in order to protect them. It's not all I can say is, and maybe I'm not a very kind man. It's been said that before. I wouldn't hold back. I wouldn't hold back. I mean, plenty of children write horrible things about their parents, right? Why, if a father or a mother had something to say about his or her child that was not complimentary, I don't know what would just per se keep them from doing it. But I mean, that's just me. You know, Graham Greene said that every writer has a needle of ice in his heart. I maybe have two.
Además de una novela sobre un padre y un hijo, en este viaje hacia el Monte Rushmore hay dos hombres adultos. que están en una situación muy difícil de soportar, que es la de los cuidados. Por un lado está Frank Bascombe cuidando de aquel hijo que fue tan difícil en el Día de la Independencia, y por el otro está el hijo necesitando cuidados a una edad en la que en principio no debería necesitarlos por su situación, y además dejándose cuidar por alguien que no debería de cuidarle, que es su propio padre, que es mucho mayor que él además. El padre, Frank, tiene una sensación como de negligencia, y el hijo ya ni siquiera se resiste porque sabe que no tiene más opciones que esta. Pero en cualquier caso, están en una situación incómoda, en una situación difícil, que llevan bien, pero que es una situación antinatural, por decirlo de algún modo. Y además, como está la parte de la masculinidad de ambos, ¿no? Que es que en el fondo, aunque no sea explícito, en su marco mental, todo lo que hace referencia a los cuidados es más bien femenino, le corresponde más a las mujeres. No sé si estaría de acuerdo.
Absolutely not. I mean, why would women be more apt to be caretakers? I mean, maybe culturally it's a determined role for women, but it isn't because women are more naturally caregivers or caretakers than men are. Mm-hmm. I have no experience about that at all. I mean, it's just a culturally assigned role. And if you don't like that assigned role, then don't do it. So, you know, I'm a man, so unfortunately I don't know anything about masculinity. I just know about being a man, which is to say, like you, being a human being. So I don't think that my responses to the world or my interests in the world are determined by my gender, nor do I think yours are. But as for the business of a child not really being comfortable being taken care of by his father, or a father not being comfortable taking care of his son who he feels some distance from and has a complicated relationship with, that is a difficult premise to say this is going to happen. 47-year-old child is dying, his 74-year-old father is going to take care of him. That's complicated. That's uncomfortable. That's, whether it's natural or not, I don't know. I don't know what's natural. But this is what they do. But for me, as a guy who writes novels, if I can undertake a complicated premise, which this is, then that gives me things to write about. Because what I'm trying to do in writing about it is make it seem understandable and make it seem plausible and make it seem interesting. So the more complicated it is, the more things don't fit together, allows me to use language to fit things together. And as I said to you before, when I can fit things together using language or some other medium, then that way I can understand them. That's what understanding is for me. Stuff fitting together which didn't want to fit together in nature.
Uh-huh. Hay un momento, el tema de la felicidad va apareciendo a lo largo del libro, y hay un momento en el que Frank le pregunta a Paul, ¿qué puedo hacer para hacerte feliz, hijo? Y para sí mismo piensa, creía que sería fácil, una obviedad, pan comido, debería serlo. Y entonces Paul contesta, nunca más voy a echar un polvo, ¿verdad? Y tengo la polla herida. Está atrapado en su asiento, mirando furiosamente el parabrisas. Es una escena desgarradora y también hilarante al mismo tiempo.
That's what I wanted it to be. That's what I wanted it to be. I mean, you ask the profoundest question, profoundest question. What can I do to make you happy? And what his son gives is the profoundest answer he can. I'm never going to get laid again. Mm-hmm. That's what would make me happy, mm-hmm. And so, and he's right. He's probably not going to get laid again. And so I just thought it was worth a try as a writer, to blend together the most basic kind of impulse and the most and the most spiritual kind of question to see where they find common ground. And of course, that's how comedy gets written. Mm-hmm. Comedy comes out of the conflict between the high and the low. Mm-hmm. And that's what that is. Mm-hmm. That was me just trying to be both a comic writer and a serious writer at the same time.
En otro momento de felicidad, se quedan a oscuras en el coche, en el aparcamiento del Hotel Hilton. Hay nieve derritiéndose en el parabrisas, los huéspedes pasean por el vestíbulo y escribe: toman un cóctel, acarrean sus maletas, ríen y conversan animadamente con desconocidos sobre el coste del combustible en invierno y el tiempo. Y dice Frank Bascombe: mi visión de la felicidad perfecta. ¿Es eso la felicidad perfecta?
In a way, yes, it is. It would seem to be one of those moments in life which you could easily either ignore or miss altogether. And the whole reason I write these books is to try to pinpoint these moments which you might miss or ignore altogether and give them substance, to pause, to stop and say, this is part of life too. And when Frank says it's a moment of perfect bliss or happiness, he's just seizing that moment and exaggerating it in language that is meant only to call your attention to it. I mean, I myself have sat in cars like that and looked out through windshields like that and seen these people like a little diorama walking around inside and thought to myself, yes, there's something blissful about this. I'm here, I'm safe, I'm warm, they're there, they're in the light, they're happy, they've had a drink. They're all just, it's a perfect blending of my place in the world and your place in the world. It's a kind of wonderful balance of things. But you have to be willing to say that. You can't just be constantly driven by your duties, constantly driven by the thing that's next. You have to be willing to stop and say, yes, and there's this too.
Por cierto, hay muchas escenas de la novela que transcurren en el asiento del coche frente al parabrisas.
It's the American experience. Mm-hmm. I asked my wife to marry me in the front seat of a car.
Oh.
Yes. So I guess I think that there are many things that can't be done in a car. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that was just how it was where I lived in Mississippi and Arkansas. So, and I'm willing to think that there are better places. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to think that you could be, some more momentous place with which to propose marriage to your girlfriend. But for me, a car was good enough at the moment. And I thought, well, I'm going to sanctify this moment, because that's actually all I'm asking people to do, is sanctify these moments. Realize that these moments are of your own creation and of your own notice and of your own valuing. And to think, in other words, to say yes.
En un momento del libro se habla de la proporción literaria de lo que abarca una vida, porque Frank hizo un curso de escritura en Michigan y le dijeron que no podía abordar el tema de la muerte en un relato, puesto que son demasiado breves para abarcar la enormidad de la vida humana. 5 libros son suficientes para abarcar la enormidad de la existencia de Frank Bascombe.
You would hope so. Because it's also my life. So I hope this is enough. Thank you very much. If the world has more to ask of me, I don't know where I'm going to find it. That was a good example of something out of my life. Which I just decided to throw into my book in order, when I throw it into my book, to see then what I say. Mm-hmm. I had a teacher who said once to me, well, you can't have a death in a short story, blah, blah, for the very same thing that you said. But I just thought to myself, well, because he thinks that's true doesn't make it true. Because he thinks that's true, it doesn't mean the short stories can't encompass the whole of life. And I'm willing to believe that short stories, because I write them too, the short stories have capacities that he didn't think that they had. Maybe even capacities that can absorb a death. I mean, there's a great short story by the Irish writer Frank O'Connor called Guests of a Nation, and it's about the deaths of two soldiers. And so, and as soon as you hear someone say a rule like that, you just have to think, oh, that can't possibly be true. So, but yeah, you know, I am trying to find a commensurate vessel for an incommensurate experience. I mean, to put all of life into a book or into 5 books is a big undertaking. You're probably doomed to fail.
Uh-huh. Y ya para acabar, bueno, el libro acaba de nuevo con la felicidad, pero antes, al final del capítulo 6, acaba así el capítulo 6, dice: las despedidas son más difíciles a mi edad. Hay algo definitivo en ellas. Basta con decir adiós sin decir adiós.
And do I think that that's true? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now I see people, and I won't see them again. I don't know that I won't see them again, but I know that I won't see them again. And of course, I have friends who die now all the time. And so I try to make partings be part of life. In other words, partings be living of a kind rather than departures, because I know departures are going to come. And that does not make life sad. It doesn't make life sad at all. It makes you think, and it causes you to pause, but it doesn't make life sad. I was telling someone yesterday about memorials and funerals and things like that. I just don't go to them anymore. I went to a few in my life, and I spoke at people's memorials, and I thought, basta, that's enough of that. You know, you're dead, and I can't do anything about it. And then so I'm alive, and I can do something about that. So that's basically what my habit now is. And so I try to just, you know, say yes to life. That's what I do. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.